Let me tell you something that should stop every single Watson supporter dead in their tracks. The Dawgs Podcast, a Cleveland Browns podcast with real credibility, real audience, real skin in the game, just came out and said it flat. Start Shedeur Sanders. Don't let Deshaun Watson see the field. No hedging. No, let's wait and see what happens in training camp. No diplomatic throat clearing. A verdict. Cold, clean, and final. And when a platform that is genuinely invested in this franchise winning football games delivers that kind of statement, you don't dismiss it. You sit down and you listen. Because here's what's happening right now in Cleveland, and I want you to really hear this. The case for Deshaun Watson starting in 2026 is not just weak, it is collapsing in real time. And the people who built that case are quietly trying to move the goalposts to training camp before anyone notices their sourcing was wrong from the beginning. Think back to the early offseason. The Watson first quotes were flying everywhere. Watson is the leader of the competition. Watson walked back into that building and reclaimed a room. Watson is definitively ahead. And every single one of those quotes was being generated during a period when nobody had put on pads. Nobody had faced a live defense. These men were in T-shirts and shorts running through walkthroughs, and the media was already writing Watson's coronation speech. That was organizational posturing dressed up as reporting. And now OTAs have opened, and the truth is starting to bleed through. Todd Monken is sitting at a podium, and he will not name Watson as the starter. Quincy Williams is telling reporters both quarterbacks are confident, accurate, and on time. And the Dawgs Podcast is saying, full stop, start Shedeur Sanders. The canyon between the pre-OTA Watson narrative and the actual OTA reality is not something you can spin your way out of. That canyon exists because the narrative was never built on what happened on the field. It was built on access, on relationships, on protecting a story that certain people needed to be true. Now let's talk about what the field is actually telling us. Because this is where the Watson argument doesn't just weaken, it completely falls apart. Deshaun Watson has had 2 torn Achilles tendons. Say that again slowly. 2 torn Achilles tendons, plus a shoulder surgery. The Achilles is not a minor injury for a quarterback. It is not something you rehab your way back from and return to full function like it never happened. Your Achilles affects your drop-back mechanics. It affects your ability to feel pressure and move within the pocket. And here's what people don't talk about enough. It affects your arm strength sequencing because your lower body is the engine that drives your throwing motion. When you've torn that tendon twice, the scar tissue, the compensation patterns, the physical limitations don't disappear because you've done the work. The body remembers what it's been through. There is a clip of Quincy Williams blitzing Watson in a drill. Watson couldn't get out of the way. Not a conditioning issue, not a focus issue, a structural limitation. And the argument that you put that structural limitation behind center in week 1 of September 2026 and call it a quarterback competition, that argument is not serious. It is not fair to the team. It is not fair to the fans. And honestly, it is not even fair to Deshaun Watson. Now here's the layer of this conversation that I think is the most important and the least covered. And I want to take my time on it because I think it changes the entire frame of how you should be looking at this quarterback situation. The argument against Watson is not just about his body. It is about what a Watson season actually produces for this franchise regardless of outcome. Think about the 2 scenarios. Watson plays and plays poorly, which is the outcome that every data point in front of us is pointing toward. And you have confirmed what everyone already suspects, wasted a season, and given Shedeur Sanders exactly 0 developmental runway behind a starting offense. That's the bad scenario. But here is the one that should actually terrify Browns fans. What if Watson plays and plays well? Because then you have spent an entire season building leverage for a quarterback in the final year of his contract. A quarterback who, based on his financial history, will walk into whatever negotiation follows a strong season and demand compensation. A quarterback whose best-case scenario this year actively damages this franchise's long-term position. There is no version of the Watson start story that ends with the Cleveland Browns better off. None. And that's the logic the Dawgs podcast laid out. That's the logic that independent voice after independent voice keeps arriving at from completely different directions. Before I keep going, if this kind of real, no-filter Browns coverage is what you've been looking for, hit that subscribe button right now and show Browns breakouts some love. We're building something here, and we need you riding with us. Now let's talk about the one thing that is going to settle this entire debate permanently, because I think it's being underestimated right now. The inter-squad scrimmages against other franchises. Those are the definitive evaluation moment of this competition. Not OTAs. Not training camp walkthroughs against your own teammates. When you put these two quarterbacks in front of a live defense from another NFL franchise, against players who have zero film on your offense, against athletes competing for roster spots who are bringing maximum effort on every single rep, that is when you find out who can actually operate at the quarterback position under conditions that approximate real football pressure. And the gap between a 23-year-old who has been competing against elite athletes his entire career and a 30-year-old with 2 Achilles surgeries and a shoulder surgery is going to be visible, undeniably visible, in a way that no one still running the Watson narrative will be able to explain away. And that brings me to the Myles Garrett trade conversation, because I cannot leave this topic alone. I won't. The argument being floated in certain NFL media circles is that the Browns should consider trading Myles Garrett for first-round picks and future draft capital. The logic being that if you're in a rebuild, you move your most valuable tradable asset and accumulate resources. And on paper, in a purely theoretical front office exercise, you can make that math work. But here is what that argument requires you to completely ignore. It requires you to ignore that Myles Garrett is the best defensive player in the National Football League. It requires you to ignore that he has never asked out, never demanded a trade, never done anything but show up and be the most dominant force on that defense every single Sunday he's been healthy. It requires you to ignore that Todd Monken is installing an offense that, if Shedeur Sanders wins this competition and becomes what his talent says he can be, makes Cleveland a legitimate AFC North threat within 2 seasons. And most importantly, it requires you to believe that this franchise has no path to winning right now, that there is no window, that the only responsible move is to tear it down and rebuild. But that's not the situation. Shedeur Sanders is real. Todd Monken's system is real. Myles Garrett is real. Week 1 in Jacksonville is real. You do not trade the anchor of your defense for conditional third-round picks when your franchise quarterback situation might, for the first time in years, actually be on the verge of resolution. No serious franchise in a legitimate competitive window makes that move. None. So here is where everything lands. When you pull back and look at the full picture, the Dawgs podcast saying, start Shedeur, period. Todd Monken refusing to name Watson at the podium. Quincy Williams telling reporters both quarterbacks are accurate and on time. Jarvis Landry and Leonard Fournette defending Shedeur's character publicly. Deion Sanders Jr. saying the plan backfired and everything is now 100-fold. Myles Garrett still in Cleveland, still anchoring a defense built for violence and speed. Every independent voice in this conversation is reading from the same page. The only voices still running the Watson-first narrative are the ones with a prior investment in it. And investments have a way of going to zero when the field starts telling a different story. So I'm asking you directly, after everything you just heard, is there a single credible argument left for starting Deshaun Watson over Shedeur Sanders in Week 1? Drop it in the comments. I want to read every word. Because if that argument exists, I haven't seen it. And neither has anyone else who's been watching what's actually happening in Berea.